Hey guys, it's Loaf. I'm back with the second in-depth build guide for the cycle. I apologize it took so long to get to the second build. I wanted to make sure everything was just right. These in-depth guides take a lot of time and effort, and so I didn't want to just send out some half-done build for you guys. So I really wanted to make sure I was able to test all the different interactions and come up with the best character that I could in that time frame. So here we go. This is the our Holy Fire Smite Paladin. I played this on live stream. We theory crafted it together with the stream. Uh, just trying to piece everything together over the last couple of weeks until we had the final product. One of the things I did want to address right at the beginning of the build guide, guys, if you're trying to make this build, if you're having problems generating ward, make sure you hit the timestamp for crafting gloves. There is one modifier you need to put on a pair of gloves. It's not hard to do. It's not super rare. You just have to have that modifier in order for the build to function. So I just want to get that out of the way. It's going to be the number one question that I get in the comments. So I figured I would address in the first 20 seconds of the video. With that being said, though, guys, this build guide is more set up as a wiki page and a video rather than a traditional build guide. It's going to be very long, but I'm going to have in-depth timestamps with how to interact with every part of this build. So if there's any questions you may have, it should be answered in this guide. So don't be scared off by the long length of the video. We're going to make sure we get you covered with everything. Now, we're going to have a leveling planner. You can level as this build, however, you don't get access to the spells for Paladin until around like level 25. So I'm going to have a level 1 to 25 planner playing Hammer Paladin just to get you to the point where you can switch. We'll go over how to do the switch, go through all of the passives. I'll have leveling sliders for those build planners as well. That way you know what passive to take and when. And then on top of that, this may just be one of the best multiplayer characters ever. I normally play solo, but if you guys do like playing characters with your friends, this is a fantastic build to do that. You can make all of your friends basically immortal at the same time as making yourself immortal. So I hope you guys enjoy the video. We'll start breaking down the skills and gear and make sure we got you all covered. All right, guys. So first step, I want to go over the leveling process. You don't get access to any of the spellcasting abilities for Paladin until the end of the Sentinel tree, and then the first 5 points into Paladin. So I didn't want to leave you hanging. I wanted to give you an alternative option to help speed through that level 1 through 25 process before you can make the switch into playing a full spellcasting Paladin. So how I like to level Paladin is with Hammer Throw. So that's going to be the first skill I spec into. All of the planners for the passives and skill trees that you're going to see in the video, I am going to have sliders available for you so you can see which points to take when, as well as I'll be going over them for you. So for the first couple points here, we're going to take one travel point to winged hammers. That's going to increase the projectile speed of the hammers themselves. We're taking the 1 point into steadfast path. What that will do is instead of throwing the hammer and then having the hammer return to you, this is going to make it just throw out and not return, but it's going to give it a 35% chance for double damage. The main reason we're taking that is to get over to here, Catapult. Catapult is going to add 4 extra projectiles with the downside of adding 4 extra mana costs. It can be kind of hard to aim the hammer sometimes when there's only a single hammer. I'm not really into playing Call of Duty. I don't want to have to aim my stuff too much. So this is going to get rid of a lot of that for you. It's going to put it into a like cone shape with 5 hammers going out with every cast. Should make it very easy for you to hit the target that you're looking for. Now, after that, we're going to be putting 2 points into Ballista. The main reason here, the damage is nice, but it's going to give us that -2 mana cost to kind of help offset the catapult. There's also some gear choices that you can make that I can show you that will help get rid of all of the extra mana costs there. But after we put the 2 points into Ballista, we're going to put 1 point to Avatar the Spire. Now, with the hammers and most projectiles in this game, they don't shotgun. So even if you're standing right next to a boss and you're hitting him with all 5 hammers, only 1 hammer is actually going to do damage. So what Avatar does is it is going to allow the hammers to go out into almost like a star shape around you, like a big nova. So that way you can hit the entire screen with hammers all at once. You don't have to aim whatsoever. You just click the button, everything on the screen dies. And then for the remaining points, we're just going to be dumping them all into Ballista, just getting that extra damage and reduced mana cost, so that way you have 0 mana problems. Now for the second skill honestly doesn't really matter all that much. I expect into Lunge. All the other abilities that you get are going to be damage based, and I don't want to be doing anything but throwing hammers. So a lunge is already a really short cooldown. It's a 4-second cooldown movement ability that can take you an entire screen over as long as you have a target to be able to use it on. So that's what I'm going to be specking into. Now for the starting points here, most of these are going to be travel points at the beginning. We'll be putting 1 point into Disarming Blow. That's going to add a chance to apply Frailty to targets that you hit during your movement path. Frailty is an ailment that when you apply it to an enemy, it makes them deal less damage to you. So nice little defensive layer. These 2 points and the point into the Initiate's Onslaught, those are completely travel points. The Cull of the Weak is decent. So what it does is it adds a Cull ability to enemies. If you're not familiar with what a Cull ability is from Path of Exile, what it does is, for this case, it says 5%. If you have an enemy that has less than 5% health and then you use Lunge on them, it's going to instantly kill them. So that's really good for bosses, but mainly it's a travel point to get over to Holy Incursion. Now, even though we don't have access to the Smite tree, Smite still hits really hard, and this is a way that we can cast it earlier. So Lunge's final hit on the traveling path has a chance to cast Smite to up to 3 nearby targets. Now, with the 4 points in there, it's going to give us a 100% chance, and that increases as well as you go like a farther distance. So before you have 4 points into there, the farther away you are when you lunge, it's still going to give you that 100% chance to cast the Smite typically. So that actually is going to do a lot of damage, help you out a lot with area clear at the beginning. And then for the remaining points, we're just going to put 1 point to Disarming Blow, and then 1 point to Impairing Strike. Impairing Strike is going to add an Immobilize feature to your lunge. So once you lunge over to a target, they're all basically going to get rooted. They can't move. It's going to make it harder for them to do damage to you. And then you can just start throwing hammers down and killing them there. That's going to be the skills for the early leveling process here. The next part I want to go over is the passive points. So this is also going to have a slider here for you to show you which points to take when. For the first 5 points, we're going to put them into Juggernaut. Juggernaut's going to give us +5 strength. Strength scales the damage of your hammer throw as well as giving you armor. And then it's also going to give you 20% fire and void res. The res is really strong. There's a lot of void monsters early on in the campaign, so getting a free 20% void res is really big. For the next 5 points, we're going to be going over to Armorclad. It's going to give us 75 armor, and it's going to give us 10% damage reduction to nearby enemies. Really strong to be able to get a damage reduction feature this early on into the campaign. Most classes don't get access to that. For the next 5 points, we're going into Valiant Charge. It's going to reduce our lunge cooldown even further by an additional 30%. It's going to have almost no cooldown. You're going to constantly be able to be lunging, so you're getting the extra 30 health. For the remaining 5 points that we're going into the base Sentinel tree, it's going to be over to Time and Faith. This is more going to be for prep for when we switch into spell casting, so you don't have to go back and respec any points. So what this will do is whenever you use Smite, it's going to give you 25 health back and 10 mana. That's going to solve all of your mana problems early on. If you are running into problems when you're playing hammers and you're having mana issues, you can also put Rive on your bar. You get that really early. So that way, anytime you run out of mana, you just cast a couple of Rives at an enemy, and that should fill your mana pool back up pretty quick. For the last 5 points while playing Hammer, you're going to be putting 5 points in the Paladin tree under Conviction. Conviction gives us a bunch of increased damage multipliers as well as penetration. Our hammers are going to be doing physical damage, so that's going to give us increased physical damage and Fizz Pen. But when we switch over to spells, we're going to be doing fire damage, and these nodes are still going to work for us, so we don't have to respec anything. And then once you put the full 5 points, that is what's going to give you access to Healing Hands, your other damaging spell. And at this point, I would transition over to a full spell casting Paladin. So we'll go over that in a little bit later on in the video. But once you do get to this point, I would stop, transition it into the spellcaster. It is very, very strong. I was one-shotting almost all the rare monsters throughout the campaign without Twink gear. And even the bosses were only taking me like 10-15 seconds to kill. Last thing I want to go over is the general gear that you're going to be looking for with playing the hammers early on. You're mainly just going to be looking for strength and anything that applies to throwing damage or throwing like attack speed. So other than that, you're just looking for res on gear. The really big pieces are going to be the Amulet, where you can get flat throwing damage. You can also get that on the Relic and the gloves. The more flat throwing damage you have is going to drastically increase the DPS of your hammers. The other really big mod to look out for is on your rings. If you have the mod that gives you flat throwing damage and minus mana cost for your hammers, I would put that on both rings. It should completely get rid of any mana cost that the hammers use, so you don't even have to worry about that. Just spam hammers to your heart's content. The only other thing to really note on the gear is the weapon. Weapons work very uniquely when it comes to throwing damage. So all of the flat damage on these melee weapons doesn't apply to throwing damage. So it has to say that it's throwing damage and not melee damage. So the only thing you're really looking for in your weapon is percentile increase to physical damage, chance to apply shred armor and hit, and then chance to apply bleed. Even though we're not scaling damage over time, we are scaling physical damage, and it actually does quite a bit of damage early on if you just get a little bit of bleed chance on your weapon, especially on those bosses. So I would just look out for that. That's going to wrap up kind of the level 1 through 25. Once you get to the point where you're ready to switch into a spellcaster, all I did was went to the vendor. I bought a couple of random pieces of gear they had, and I just crafted on like attunement and spell damage on as many pieces of gear as I could. And I was using the like level 25 gear all the way through the campaign, pretty much, with the exception of my weapon, just to get increased flat spell damage as I was going on. So yeah, just grab a couple pieces from the vendor, slap attunement, slap spell damage on there, get rid of all your hammer throw gear, and then you should be good to go through the rest of the campaign, as long as you're just upgrading it as you go on to higher tiers. But that should wrap up the leveling process. Now we'll be switching over and going over all of these skills for the actual build that we'll be using. Alrighty, so now we've gone through the hammer leveling process and we have transitioned into a spellcaster. You've crafted, your generic attunement and spell damage on all your gear for the leveling process. The first skill that you're going to want to specialize into is Healing Hands. Now, what Healing Hands typically does is it heals all the allies in a targeted area for a flat amount of health, and then additional health over the next 3 seconds. Now, it doesn't sound too exciting, but when you respec your skill, it should give you about 3 to 4 points, depending on what level you are when you transition, to put into Healing Hands right away. The first point that you're going to want to take is right here in Searing the Light. So this is actually going to make it so Healing Hands not only heals, but now it also does fire spell damage in that same area of effect at 200% effectiveness for flat spell damage. So that is a massive AoE that is going to hard carry all of the area clear early on in the game. The next 4 points that are very important is going to be Hand of Aurelis. So what that's going to do is give you a 100% chance when you cast Smite to cast Healing Hands directly on top of it. Smite is a single target spell, so it's going to hit really hard single target, but now it's also got the additional splash from Healing Hands to completely cover your area clear. So make sure these are the first 5 points you go into, otherwise you're going to have a miserable time through the leveling process. For the next few points here, we're going to be putting 2 points into Bane of Evil. What this does is it's going to give you 2 flat spell damage for your Healing Hands for every 10% of increased healing effectiveness we have. We are going to be stacking healing effectiveness pretty much everywhere we can get it in this build. It's not only going to give us a massive amount of damage, it's also going to give us a massive amount of healing that later on in the build we're going to be converting over to ward to give us those massive ward pools that you were seeing in the original clips showcasing the build. The next 2 points, we're going to go into Cleric's Wrath. That's going to give you damage per level of specialized buff skills. So that's going to be 1% multiplicative damage per level on there. So your buff skills are going to be your Holy Aura and your Sigils of Hope that you'll get later on. Now, the next 2 points after that is going into Virtue of Patience. It is going to give you minus 32% cast speed, but we don't care because we're never actually casting Healing Hands ourselves. We're always casting it with Smite. So the negative effect there does not apply to us. It's also going to give 48% multiplicative damage, 48% increased healing, and 32% increased area of effect to help that area clear even more. Next, we're going to be going into 1 point into Divine Barrier. Now, this is probably the most misunderstood node when it comes to playing a Healing Hands build. So that first line, Healing Hands also grants ward to allies based on your attunement. You're probably thinking when you read that, oh, he's got a ton of ward on his build, he's generating all this crazy stuff as he's casting that I saw in the original clips, so he must be stacking a ton of attunement. I have almost no attunement on my gear in the end game. That line is completely useless, throw it away. The only part that you care about is the second part that says if the ally has an effect that causes them to gain ward per second based on their missing health, then all of the Healing Hands healing is converted to ward. So if you would normally cast Healing Hands and it would give you 100 health, instead, it's just going to give you 100 ward every single time you cast it. And if you scale a metric crap ton of healing effectiveness, that's going to ramp up to where you're getting like a couple thousand ward every time you cast Healing Hands. The mod that it's talking about, I'm going to go more into the gear later, but just so you know, is this mod on your gloves where it says 5% of current health lost per second, 5% of missing health gained as ward per second. That's the mod I was talking about at the very beginning of the video where everyone's going to have questions about. Make sure you craft that on there. There will be a timestamp later in the video that's going to show you exactly how to get that mod on your gloves. It's very easy. It's not rare at all. Make sure you pay attention to that. All right. Back into the Healing Hands tree. So we've grabbed our node here that converts all the healing over to ward. The next point we're going to go into is home ward. So Healing Hands, instead of being cast on top of Smite, is now always cast on yourself. I avoid getting this early on during the campaign because I didn't really need the defensive layer of the extra ward in the campaign. I just wanted the increased area of effect clear on top of my smite. So I would hold off on getting this if you're still going through the campaign. But this is what's going to allow the Healing Hands to always be hitting you, getting you that like couple thousand ward every single cast. On top of that, it'll give you the increased healing effectiveness. Next up, what you're going to want to get is the 2 points into Prayer of the Fallen. That is going to give you an additional 50% increased healing effectiveness, which is really nice. But the really big note here is Urgent Healing. Healing Hands restores an additional health up front of 140. So before, the base healing of Healing Hands was 100. Now, with this node, it's 240, which again gets multiplied like crazy with your healing effectiveness. So I know it sounds better to grab the more points in the Prayer of the Fallen. I promise you, Urgent Healing is the best node here to scale your ward. And then to finish off the remaining points, we're going to be putting 1 point into Raya's Chariot. That is going to turn our Healing Hands into a movement ability. So you can stop using a lunge after you get this point if you'd like. And then you get the 1 point to Sun Shroud. That's going to make you immune while moving, while using the Healing Hands as your movement skill. So this is really big for really high corruption bosses. If they're about to send like a one-shot meteor on a shade kill or something from the side of the screen, just cast Healing Hands, use your little charge ability. It's going to completely negate that attack and just make you 100% immune. So really good for cheesing a bunch of boss mechanics. If you do happen to get the levels of Healing Hands on your helmet, what you're going to be grabbing is the extra points into Blessed Parish. That is mainly just for the increased area of effect to help your clear a lot. This is a little bit of an area lacking build. It's mainly set up for bossing and getting really smooth boss kills. So your area clear can be a little bit lackluster. This is going to help improve that. For the second skill, we're going to be going into Smite. This is our main damage ability. So what this does is it creates a firebolt that comes from the sky and hits your target. This is also going to be what's triggering our Healing Hands like we were talking about in the previous skill. So every time you cast Smite, it's casting the Healing Hands on top of it as well. So how we're going to be leveling this guy out is we're going to start with the first 2 points into Pillars of Light. So whenever you directly cast Smite, you have a chance to double cast it. So that's going to give you 24% with the first 2 points into there. For the next 5 points, we're going to be putting them into Sacrifice. So Smite deals significantly more damage, but Smite consumes a percentage of your current health. This is giving you 50% multiplicative damage per point up to 250. That is one of the highest multipliers out of any skill in the game that's built into the tree for you. It does come with the downside of costing 15% of your health when you cast it, but that really doesn't matter because we have so much healing coming through this build. Not only do we get the healing from Healing Hands early on, but Smite also heals you. So if you're standing next to the target that you're hitting, Smite's going to be healing you, as well as we're going to be proccing a couple other abilities later on that are also going to be healing you. If you do have any problems with it early on in the campaign, you can just take a couple more points into Atonement, which reduces the amount of health that it's actually sacrificing, but it shouldn't be a problem as long as you're following how I spec everything out. So for the next couple points here, we're going to put 1 travel point into Atonement, and then 4 points into Deep Impact. That's going to give us 100% critical strike multiplier for Smite. But this is going to be a crit stacking build. We're building this character a lot different than the other Smite casters that you've seen previously. There's been a lot of people who have been doing like Electrify scaling, Ignite scaling. I know Karn had a very similar build where he wasn't stacking crit, but he was doing just like flat spell damage. So our version of the build is actually going to be all fire damage and crit base. So we're going to be taking the 4 points into deep impact for that crit multi. Next, we're going to be grabbing the extra point into Pillars of Light to put the double cast up to 36%. The more casts of Smite that we're doing, the more healing hands that we're proccing, which means the more ward we're getting. So we're going to be stacking a lot of crit and a lot of cast speed with this build. Next up, we're going to be putting 3 travel points into Holy Fire. That's going to add some Ignite chance to your Smite cast. The Ignite chance is good later on as we get into the unique items, but we actually we only need to get 1 stack of an Ignite on each monster, and we're going to be using a unique item later that's going to give us 100% Ignite chance, so this is mainly just for the travel points. The next point is the Conflagration. We're putting all 5 points into here. This is going to give you 100% extra hit damage for Smite as long as it's against an enemy with at least 1 stack of Ignite. So that is a massive amount of points there. I believe without the extra levels in Smite, you can only get 4 points. So if you do end up getting the plus levels on your Relic, you're going to be putting the extra point over to Conflagration, and then we will be putting the remaining points into Blinding Flash. Blinding Flash is a similar thing that the previous node is doing, except for against blinded enemies, it's going to give you an extra 10% multiplicative damage. So you only get 5% per node here, whereas here you get 20% per node. So make sure you're taking Conflagration first before you grab Blinding Flash. We only have the 10% chance to blind enemies on hit. However, if you end up crafting blind chance on your wand later on, that will make up for the extra chance to give you this multiplier more often. For the third skill, we're going to be speccing into Holy Aura. This is the skill that you get when you ascend into a Paladin. What this does is you and nearby allies gain 30% increased damage, 15% elemental resistance, and then if you activate the ability, it is going to double all of the stats that Holy Aura gives. This includes the abilities that you spec into the tree. So to start leveling it out, we are going to be grabbing 2 travel points into Raya's Devotion with the Ignite chance. We don't really care about the Ignite, but the main thing we want to get to is right here where it's going to give us 9% increased cast speed. And then when Holy Aura is activated, that's going to be an extra 18% cast speed. So just more healing hands procs that we're going to be getting from casting our smites faster. For the next 2 points, we're going to be going over to Raya's Fury for the extra fire penetration. So that's going to be an extra 10% penetration. Since we aren't playing lightning, it is a little bit harder for us to get penetration, so we're going to get it where we can. For the next points here, we're going to be putting 2 travel points into Vital Boon. We don't care about health regen at all. We're a ward build. And then we're going to be getting Redemption for the 40% increased healing effectiveness. Again, that's going to be scaling up the damage and the amount of ward we're getting from healing hands. And that will also be doubled when we activate it for 80% increased healing effectiveness. And then for the remaining points here, we're going to be grabbing 3 points into True Strike for an additional 30% crit chance and 15% crit multiplier. The skill is it's very simple, so it didn't take too long to kind of go through everything. Everything should be pretty straightforward. We like crit, we like fire pen, we like cast speed, we like healing effectiveness. Hopefully that all makes sense to you guys. I typically cast Holy Aura almost on cooldown, or every time I run into like a tanky rare mob, or I just need a little bit of extra burst damage. To activate Holy Aura, it's going to give you a whole bunch of extra buffs that are going to be doubled. All of these are given to you as a passive increase, but yeah, once you activate the Holy Aura itself, it's going to double them. So instead of 15 crit multi, it's going to be 30, 30 crit chance is going to turn to 60, and so on. But yeah, once you get the last point, just put the extra point into True Strike for the extra crit chance. For the fourth skill, we're going to be going into Sigils of Hope. So what Sigils of Hope does is it summons a sigil that orbits around you, and it causes you and your allies additional fire damage to your spells. It gives you a little bit of health regen, and then we can get a whole bunch of extra buffs from different nodes that we spec into the tree. So by default, you can have 3 sigils up at a time, and then we can increase that with a couple of the other nodes. So to start the leveling process out here, what we're going to be doing is grabbing 2 points into Empowering Sigils. This is going to give us an additional 10% damage per active sigil we have. After that, we're going to be putting the 2 travel points into Word of Alacrity. It's going to give you some cast speed and heal amount. This is another source that's going to be healing us on the build to help get rid of that health drain effect that we have from our gloves. And then the next point is going to be going over here. So what this does is it's going to change Sigils to being an instant cast skill with a 1-second cooldown and an extra 10 mana cost. Now, with it being an instant cast skill, that means you can cast it while you're casting other abilities or while you're moving. This skill is very important because, as you've noticed in the video, I have a really low mana almost all the time. That's actually intentional. We don't have any mana problems on this build. I'm using Sigils to purposely drain my mana pool to help proc one of our unique items that's going to give us a lot of extra damage. So this is how I'm doing that. I'm just using the Sigils to kind of regulate my mana. Every time I get above 50 mana, I just tap Sigils really quick one time, and it doesn't interrupt me at all. It doesn't stop my moving, just helps drop that mana pool further and make sure I have uptime of the maximum amount of Sigils as possible. So after we get the quality of life from that node, we're going to be putting 2 travel points into Iron Sigils. We're in a ward build. We don't care about endurance. We're going to get the 4 points into Enduring Hope. That's going to add an extra 8 seconds per sigil. This is going to give us 100% uptime on our sigils. I'm casting the node with the instant cast of the sigils pretty often there. So I'm constantly refreshing the sigils. And with that extra 8 seconds, we'll have 100% uptime. We'll then be going over to Tetragram for the +1 maximum sigil. So now instead of 3 sigils, we're going to be having 4 up. And then for the remaining points here, I'm going to be putting 5 points into Invigorate for the increased healing effectiveness. That's 30% increased healing effectiveness times 4 because of our sigils. So that's a massive multiplier. And then for the rest of the points, we're going to be putting 1 extra point into Empowering Sigils for 15% increased damage per sigil. And we're going to be putting the last 2 points into Decree of Flame. So by default, the sigils give us +3 flat fire damage. Now they're going to be giving us 4 flat fire damage times 4. So that is going to be the sigils there. But yes, it is a massive utility skill that allows us to be able to actually drain our mana pool to stay at that low mana marker as much as I can. And then we're taking the the mana node and the passive tree in the original Sentinel, the Time and Faith, is to help kind of balance that mana struggle there. So just in case if you accidentally ever put yourself in negative mana, you could just cast Smite again, and it's going to regain your mana, put you back into positive. But we want to be as close to the bottom of our mana as possible, as we'll get later on when we start going into the unique items that we're using for the build. For the final skill, we're going to be taking Volatile Reversal. What this does by default is it returns you to the position that you were at 2 seconds ago, reverting changes to your health and mana. Now, this sounds kind of like a weird skill and can be a little bit clunky, but I assure you it is definitely worth using. This is one of the most powerful skills inside the Sentinel toolkit that you can get. And we'll go over why, because we're giving a whole bunch of extra buffs on top of going back in time by a couple seconds. So for leveling this skill, the first thing we're going to grab is the 1 point into Timestamp. So you have a chance to recover a percentage of Volatile Reversal's remaining cooldown when you kill an enemy or you hit a boss or rare enemy. Next, we'll be grabbing the 3 points into Warped Time. So if you go back in time, it's going to give you 30% increased cast speed. That's a lot of cast speed for a build that's really trying to stack as much cast speed as possible. After that, we're going to be going and grabbing the 1 point into Time Loss Vitality. That's going to make it so it no longer puts your health pool back to what it was 2 seconds ago, but instead it's going to increase the cooldown recovery of the skill by 60%. Next, we're going to be putting the 2 points into Traveler's Fatigue to give us an additional 50% cooldown recovery. And it's going to give you a negative health regen while the ability's on cooldown. That doesn't matter. We have so much healing coming into this build. On top of that, we're ward build. So it's a completely useless negative stat there. It doesn't affect us at all. Next, we're going to be grabbing Time Lost Wisdom. This is also going to make it so it doesn't affect our mana pool when we go back in time, but it's going to give us 300% cooldown recovery speed. So we're going to be able to get this up all the time. It says a 24-second cooldown. It's really only a few seconds on the cooldown for this ability. All right, next up, we're going to be grabbing the Terminal Void Rift. So when you cast Volatile Reversal, you create a Void Rift where you arrive. This is going to be important with one of the other skills that we're going to get into in just a second. We're going to be gathering 3 points into Dark Expanse as travel points. This is also going to increase the area of effect of the Void Rift by 120%. We're going to want to make sure we're hitting the monster that we're fighting with the Void Rift because of this next node here in Harbinger of Dust. Enemies hit by Volatile Reversal's Void Rifts take increased damage for 4 seconds. So that is a 30% more damage multiplier for targets if they get hit by that Void Rift. That is a massive damage increase, especially for those high HP bosses. So we're getting 30% increased cast speed and 30% more damage. And then for the remaining points, we're going to get the other point here into an additional Void Rift. So it's going to be doing a Void Rift where you currently are when you cast ability, and then where it puts you wherever you were standing 2 seconds ago. Typically with this build, we just face tank everything with bosses. We don't move because we're just getting so much ward. So it's just going to do 2 Void Rifts directly on top of you, hitting the monster, just making sure they're getting tagged so you get that extra 30% damage. And then the remaining points, we're going to put 2 points into Catching Up. It's going to give us 12% movement speed if we've cast Void Rift, or if we've cast a Volatile Reversal recently, and then the extra points into Time Sap for that increased cooldown recovery speed. Alrighty, guys. Now that we've gone through the skills and we have a base understanding on how everything synergizes together and what's doing our damage, how we're scaling everything, we start breaking down the passive tree here for you, and then after that, we'll get into the gear. So as far as the base Sentinel passive tree goes, it's the exact same way that we set up the hammers. So we're going to be taking the 5 points into Juggernaut. We don't get the damage scaling from the strength, but it does still give us armor. We're going to be armor stacking pretty heavily, as Paladin as a whole doesn't really get a lot of damage reduction outside of like armor and block, which we're not really going to be able to use block since we're not using a shield. So we're still going to grab those. I'm not stacking any health on this build whatsoever. I'm completely ignoring health, as I'm a complete ward build. After 1 cast of my Smite, I already have more ward than my health. So there's just no point in going the Vitality nodes. So we're going to take 5 points of Juggernaut for the strength and the resistance. And then we are going to be moving on over to the 5 points in Armorclad for the damage reduction. This is one of the few places we can get it. 5 points into the Valiant Charge for the cooldown recovery speed for our movement skill. For the movement skill, you can be using Lunge, or you can use Healing Hands as your movement. I normally use Lunge during the Echoes and then switch over to Healing Hands for bosses, as it doesn't require a target. That's where we're going to grab those points. And then the 5 points in the Time and Fate. Like I was saying with the Sigils, this is going to help us kind of regulate our mana. In case I accidentally cast a Sigil and it puts me at negative mana, this will help me jump past negative mana. If you're at negative mana when you cast Smite, Smite costs 0 mana, so you can still cast it. However, it won't proc your Healing Hands if you're at negative mana, and that will get you killed. You need to make sure you're always at positive mana. This will help balance that. I could see an argument once you kind of fine tune where your mana's at on taking a couple points out of here and then maybe putting them into Relentless for the stun avoidance. We'll get more into stun avoidance and why it's super important for the build later on. But otherwise, I'd set the tree up like this. Next, we're going to go into the Paladin tree. Let me actually use the scroll wheel here, so that way you guys can see the kind of the pathing for everything. So first 5 points is going to go into Defiance. I do that just to get the LE res. I like to get my resistance nodes first. That way I kind of know where I'm gearing my character, so that way I'm not having to like replace gear later on because I got a couple more points and now the resistance doesn't make sense that I got there. So I try to get these nodes first. The Attunement is going to give us damage for both Smite and Healing Hands. So if we look at the scaling for those abilities, it gives us 5% healing effectiveness per point of attunement. Healing effectiveness equals damage as well as more ward. And then for Smite, it gives us healing effectiveness and damage. So attunement's a pretty good stat to go with there. So that's why we're going to grab those nodes, and for the extra resistance it's going to be giving us. And then next we'll go ahead. So we'll finish out the remainder 3 points in Defiance, and then we'll put 7 points over into Valor for the health and healing effectiveness. We don't really care about the health. We're not stacking health, but that 35% healing effectiveness is going to be really nice for our damage as well as our ward generation. After we get the 7 points in there, that's going to give us far enough along that we can start putting points into Holy Icon. Holy Icon's going to give us more healing effectiveness as well as a bunch of necrotic res. So we're getting a bunch of LE res and a bunch of necrotic res for free, which is really big. So we're going to put the 7 points in there, cap that out. After we get to that point, that is what's going to allow us to unlock Sigils of Hope. And now that we've got the resistance, we're going to switch over to the Void Knight tree. Now we need to put points into Void Knight tree for Volatile Reversal. So we're going to put the points into the Abyssal Endurance for the 40% Void Res and 40% Fizz Res. So we're getting a lot of our resistances already covered just from the passive tree before we even touch any of our gear. The reason why I'm not just going to put 5 points in there and I'm going to put 10 points is for this node right here. So we get the critical strike multiplier per point spent in Void Knight. So that's just an extra 11% crit multi on top of all that free res. After that, we are going to swap back into the Paladin, and we're going to be putting 8 points into Prayer. This node is pretty big. It's going to give us more healing effectiveness again. It's kind of the theme of the build if you guys haven't put it together yet, as well as giving us 56% increased damage, which is super solid. We're going just with the 8 points for now because we're going to get access to Holy Precision. We are playing a crit build, and the crit chance for Paladin can be kind of hard. And so this is going to give us 200% increased spell critical strike chance. The other 2 mods aren't going to work for us. We're not doing any throwing damage, and I am playing Fire Smite instead of Lightning Smite. We'll get more into why once we get into the gear. But that 200% spell crit chance is really, really strong. After that, we'll be grabbing the 12 points into the duality node here. This is just a amazing passive point here. The health, obviously, I don't care about, but we're getting increased damage, healing effectiveness, and increased mana. Mana is really, really important for our gear. We're using a unique that scales based on how much missing mana we have, which is, again, why I'm trying to keep that mana pool as low as possible. So we want a really high overall mana pool, and then we want to keep that mana as low as possible. So 24% increased mana is super dope. And then after that, we'll grab the extra 2 points into Prayer to finish that off. And then we are going to grab the 8 points into Conviction for all of the penetration that gives. That gives us the 16% Fire Pen, which is great. And then we're going to be filling out the other points here. So we're going to grab the rest of the points into Valor, get all that healing effectiveness. And then I'm going to grab 1 point into Divine Essence. What Divine Essence does is every time you heal yourself or an ally, you have a chance to gain a Divine Essence. Divine Essence lasts for 10 seconds, and it gives you 10% increased armor and 10% increased healing effectiveness. I'm stacking armor, I'm stacking healing effectiveness. Both those are super solid. And then it's also going to reduce the duration of stuns on you. That's one of the biggest defensive issues that you have when you start pushing really high corruption, because we don't have a lot of health, is that you're going to start getting stunned a lot. So we're going to start using a lot of stun mitigation tech as we get later on in the build. So you can have a maximum of 3 Divine Essences. I only need 1 point, even though it's a 6% chance. I'm healing so much from so many different sources. You're going to be at like max Divine Essence stacks 90% of the time. So just the 1 point in there. And then we are going to fill out the points into Light of Raya for that 96% increased fire damage and 12% move speed. So pretty self-explanatory why we're grabbing that. Don't need any further explanation. The final 4 points we're going to be putting into Faith Armor. I'm not actually using crit avoidance in this build. I'm using less damage taken from crits. I'll explain why when we get to the gear section, but the main reason why I'm grabbing these points is just for that 15% increased armor, making it a lot easier for us to hit that armor cap. And then that is going to wrap up all of the passive points. Hopefully all of that made sense. If you need any further explanation of why we're taking something over something else, feel free to leave a comment in there. But that will wrap up the passives there, and then we'll go ahead and start working on the gear. All right, so now that we've gone through the skills and the passives, let's get over the last scaling portion here. Let's go over the unique pieces of gear, how they function, and what exactly they do for the build. Now, I want to point out none of these uniques are necessary for the build to function. You can completely push, easily 300 plus corruption without a single one of the uniques. None of them are even super rare. They're all fairly common and easy to get, with the exception of maybe the idol. So it should be pretty easy to get these rolling. Now, if you're familiar with my Rune Master guide, I'm going to use the same setup with this, where the uniques I'm going to have, there's going to be showing as a 4 legendary potential uniques. Obviously, that's absurd. It's very hard to get 4 legendary uniques, especially for good ones. I don't expect you to have that. Most of my uniques I use in the build are 1 to 2 LP uniques. I don't even have I don't think I'm using a single 3 LP. I actually tried to use one and I missed the slam on it. So how I have these set up is I have a mod that's at T6, T5, T4, and T3. That is to show you the priority of the order of what stats you should really focus on trying to slam. So the first unique that we're going to go through is Devotion. So the reason why we use this amulet is it gives you 1% increased cast speed with Smite per 2% missing mana. Then the other portion is you get +1 flat spell damage with Smite per 5 missing mana. So that's why we were talking so much about our mana pool when we were going through the skills and the passives, and why I'm keeping it below 50 mana the entire time is the higher mana pool I can get, and then the lower I can keep that mana pool, the more flat damage I'm getting and the more cast speed I'm getting. On top of that, the amulet gives us a whole bunch of healing effectiveness, and then it gives us a decent amount of res as well. I'm not playing lightning damage, so I don't benefit from the lightning damage or the lightning pen, but it's still absolutely want to use this amulet if you have the option for it. And then we're prioritizing getting that healing effectiveness and then crit multi as the 2 most important stats if you do happen to get a devotion with legendary potential. The next unique that I would recommend farming for is the Prismatic Gaze. So what this does is it gives you base crit. It is very hard to get base crit on items. Paladin has a hard time stacking crit because it doesn't have a lot of access to a lot of base crit. And so this can give you up to 4% base crit. If you don't know how crit works, typically every spell starts out with 5% base. And if you get 100% increased critical strike chance on a piece of gear, and you have 5% base crit, then your total crit chance is 10%, right? So getting an extra 4% base crit on a Prismatic Gaze is almost doubling the amount of crit chance from all of your other sources. So really try to focus on getting the base crit number as high as possible. The other stats are good, but they don't matter as much as that base crit does. And then if you do happen to get this with legendary potential, the number one thing you want to try to hit is the plus levels to healing hands. I still don't have this on my build. So the gameplay you saw, I am missing those 2 to 3 levels of healing hands. I would love to get it. It would add a lot more area clear for us. I just haven't been that lucky yet. So this is probably the more rare unique on this list to get legendary potential on. So these are the mods that you would be going for if you happen to get one with legendary potential. Now, I know we talked about the crit avoidance in the passive tree. The reason why I went with reduced bonus damage taken from crits instead of crit avoidance is I want to stack armor on all of my suffixes. And if you look at the flat armor versus the reduced bonus damage taken from critical strikes hybrid roll, it is just barely lower than just getting generic flat armor. So because I'm not stacking health on any of my gear, all my suffixes are going towards armor anyways, so I might as well just go for reduced bonus damage taken from crits and not worry about getting crit avoidance on my blessings or my rings. So that's the next unique though. We're mainly using this for the flat crit. It does also have a secondary kind of cool interaction. So you create a Prism Shard when you directly use an elemental skill that costs less than 40 mana. Smite costs less than 40 mana. It costs 0. So that's going to be creating Prism Shards for you. You can have a max of 5 Prism Shards. And what Prism Shards do is they orbit around you for 10 seconds and then expire. If you release them, though, they target the nearest enemy and explode. And they reduce the amount of elemental resistance that that monster has. So it shreds off all LE res. So lightning, fire, cold. It does all 3 elemental resistances. And it takes off 5% of their elemental res per shard. And then you can release your Prism Shards that you've gathered by using a skill that costs at least 40 mana. Our Sigils that we're constantly spamming will proc this. So you're building up those shards with Smite, and then you're releasing them whenever you cast a Sigil to shred away resistance. That's really strong for bosses. And then on top of that, it gives you less elemental damage taken. So again, Paladin struggles with getting any kind of damage reduction. It's just really good at healing and getting a huge ward pool. So getting that 10% less elemental damage taken is really big. The next unique that I want to go through is right here, the Immolator's Oblation. This is one of the boss uniques. that we're going to be farming out of the Soulfire dungeon. And what the reason why we're using this unique is it says you have a 46 to 100% chance to ignite yourself when you use a fire skill. Smite is a fire skill. So that's going to be putting ignites on ourselves. Now, you're probably asking, why is that a good thing? So the next line here is you get 4 to 6 flat spell damage for fire and necrotic skills per stack of ignite on you up to 40 stacks. So we're getting a whole bunch of increased fire damage. We're already scaling cast speed, so we're going to be casting quite often. And then on top of all that flat damage, you have a 4 to 6% chance to gain Frenzy for 2 seconds when you directly use a fire skill per stack of ignite on you. Frenzy gives you 20% increased cast speed, so even more cast speed to proc more self-ignites, super strong belt. You get a little bit of increased ignite duration, making it easier to keep those stacks on you. And then also you have the 100% chance to cleanse all ailments on potion use. So if you get a bunch of like poison stacks on you, or you got a bunch of bleed stacks, and you need to clear them, you can just hit your potion. It'll clear off all the negative ailments on you. So super strong belt. For these slams, we do want to actually prioritize the hybrid mod that gives us health and stun avoidance. You don't really need to prioritize stun avoidance if you're planning on playing like sub 700 corruption. But once you start getting above 700 corruption, monsters are going to start stunning you more often. They stun you based on the amount of damage they're doing versus how much health you have. And since I don't really stack a lot of health, you're going to get stunned a lot. So I am going to start prioritizing getting stun avoidance on a couple pieces of gear to help compensate for that. As long as I'm able to keep attacking, I don't die. I have so much ward and so much ward generation that you would have to one-shot me to kill me. And it's pretty hard to one-shot somebody who has 30k ward. So stun avoidance is really big. Other than that, we're going for fire damage and then that hybrid armor mod. For the next unique that pairs well with the Immolator's Oblation is a Soulfire Relic. Now, Soulfire is typically an Acolyte unique, but it doesn't have a required Acolyte tag on it, so you can actually use it on any class. And the reason why I'm using this is it's a very low level requirement item, and it's very easy to get legendary potential on it to get additional stats. And what it does is it gives you 10% more spell damage to ignited enemies. We're igniting everything, and the more multiplier gets applied at the end of the damage calculation. So that is a massive spike in damage. And then on top of that, you get at least 100% chance to ignite on hit with fire skills. So now we have 100% chance to ignite enemies. Every enemy we hit is going to have an ignite on them, so we're going to be getting that more spell damage multiplier all the time. You also get 60% increased fire damage if you've killed an enemy recently. And then you get 100% armor while ignited. We are always ignited because of the Immolator's Oblation, because we're self-igniting ourselves. So that 100% increased armor is really big for making sure we hit the armor cap. You cap out at armor at 85%, so that 100% will push us over and make sure we are negating as much damage as possible. The other two lines obviously don't apply to us. They're Hungering Souls based. We don't have access to Hungering Souls because we're a Paladin. For the next unique is the Yulia's Path. Now, there is only one reason why we're using this pair of boots is because it can give us up to 114% healing effectiveness. You normally can't get healing effectiveness on a pair of boots. There's one other pair of boots that gives you like 30%, I think. So being able to jump up to 100% increased healing effectiveness off this pair of boots is massive. It gives you a lot of resistance as well. It gives you fire, necrotic res, gives you cold res, gives you movement speed. So this is going to cover a lot of the res that we're not getting on the passive tree, so we can focus our other suffixes on armor. And then the last unique on our gear section here is a Font of the Erased. This is not mandatory whatsoever. I'm not even currently using one on the build just because I've had really bad RNG. So this is a Weaver's Will unique. So it's going to randomly add the legendary potential stats for you as you kill monsters. You don't have any control over what it chooses. So if you happen to find one of these, slap it on your character, see what modifiers it acquires as you're killing monsters. And the big things is you really want to try to get the healing effectiveness and the stun avoidance if you can. The main reason why we'd like to use this unique, if you do get one with good rolls, is it gives you 10% increased mana, which is really big. And then other than that, it can roll all the same stats as a normal ring can. So that's an option, but not a requirement. Then the last unique that I use on the build is the Throne of Ambition. So this is another boss drop. The reason why we do that is every time you hit a boss or a rare enemy, you gain a stack of ambition. What ambition stacks do is it gives you 2% more, so not percentile, but more fire damage per stack of ambition, and 2% more armor. So you get up to 20 stacks. That's 40% more fire damage and 40% more armor. This is an absurd item for bossing damage. My bossing damage goes through the roof once I get my 20 stacks. This is an absolute no-brainer if you're trying to push heavy corruption and not struggle against bossing. So that's going to wrap up all the uniques for us. I'm going to have timestamps later on in the video showing what order to farm these in, where to target farm them, and how to acquire them. So all of that will be in the timestamps for you. So if you're missing one of these uniques in particular, just take a look at that timestamp. I'll help you get them. The next portion I want to go over is just the stat priorities for our Exalted pieces of gear. So the first one I'm going to go over is our wand. I am using a crystal wand base. Your base item is very important in Last Epoch. So make sure that you are paying attention to that. Use the same bases I'm using. I know on my previous build, I had lots of people who would link me their build planners and be like, hey, check out my build. What do you think I should upgrade? 95% of the time, they were just using the wrong base items and they were missing like half the power on their character. So make sure you're using the right bases, guys. Crystal Wand, the reason why we're using it is it gives us up to 60 flat spell damage, and it gives us 60 flat mana. Again, Devotion, we're mana stacking. Mana's really strong. It gives us a whole bunch of extra flat damage for having that. For the Exalted mod, we want to focus on cast speed. The T5 modifier, we'd like to get increased spell critical strike chance. You need at least one good spell critical strike chance roll on your gear somewhere just to get up to that close to 100% crit. So you can get this here, you can get it on your offhand. It doesn't matter where you get it. Just try to get at least one good T5 increased spell critical strike chance. And then for the suffixes, you want to make sure that you have a chance to apply blind. If you guys remember, on the smite tree, we get an extra damage multiplier against blinded enemies, but we only have a 20% chance to apply blind from the tree itself. So we can get, an extra 52% there. So we're getting a 72% chance to blind targets with T5. So that's pretty good. And then other than that, the other suffix you can get is the Fire Pen. And if you are lucky enough to still have some room on the wand and you can land a sealed modifier, you want to go for critical strike multiplier on there. Next up, we have the chest piece. I am using a Champion Regalia because it gives a crap ton of armor. So it gives us plus 700 armor. And then it also gives 17% of armor mitigation, also applies damage over time. You should be able to cap out armor at the 85% on this build. So anything you can get to apply to dots is really, really strong. Now for the modifiers, the main Exalt modifier you're looking for is flat mana. The flat mana is going to scale much higher than the percentile mana since we're not getting thousands of mana. So try to go for the flat mana. And then for the T5 modifier, try to get increased shred armor effect. We're going to have a lot of armor shred that I'll get into later when we get into our idols. So increasing the effect of that is going to be really strong for those like big tanky mobs. As far as the suffixes, we're looking for that hybrid armor roll and percentile armor roll like we explained earlier. And then if you can seal a modifier on it, try to get the percentile mana sealed on there. The next item here is our offhand. You really want to get one of the skull bases, depending on what level you are, that gives you the flat crit chance as an implicit. So again, it really, really matters that you're using the right base item for the character. So the best one you can get is a Crystal Skull, because that goes up to 6% extra base crit chance, just modifying all of your other crit rolls to be way, way higher. So it can roll from 3 to 6. The most important thing on this item over all the rest of the stats is trying to hit that 6% spell crit. Now, on top of that, it's going to give us a little bit of ward retention, which we get almost none of on a Paladin. So that 18% is actually really big. As far as the Exalted mod, you're going for cast speed. Next importance would be crit multi. I'm able to cover most of my suffixes for the resistance on passive trees and unique items. So I didn't really need any resistances here. And you can't get armor on an offhand. So I went for chance to slow attackers and chance to chill attackers just to make it so you have less damage coming into you as much as possible, since we don't have a lot of damage reduction. If you can seal a modifier off, just seal off increased spell critical strike chance. Next up is the ring. So I recommend using a ruby base ring. You could also use a copper base ring if you need extra crit chance. So that would be good. I know flat mana is good. I don't use the Sapphire Ring because I don't actually want the mana regen. That means that we're going to have to be casting more sigils if we're regenning more mana. It's not terrible, but I would prefer to use either a ruby or a copper ring for that increased damage. And then for the T6 modifier, you're looking for increased healing effectiveness. Obviously, we've explained that a lot. Healing effectiveness, we want to get everywhere we can. For the T5 modifier, you can either look for increased spell damage or increased fire damage. I get this question pop up quite a bit on stream. Like, what's the difference between them? They are the exact same. A T5 increased spell damage can roll the same exact number as a T5 increased fire damage. So it doesn't matter which one you get, just get one of them on there. They're both going to apply to all of our abilities. And then for these suffixes, you're going to want to get a little bit of resistance on here. So whichever resistance you're missing, so on here I put physical res, and then you really need to try to focus on getting stun avoidance if you're planning on pushing high corruptions like we talked about earlier. There's only a few spots you can get that. One of them is the ring, so you want both of your rings to have stun avoidance on there. Next up, we have the gloves. We're using the Eternal Gauntlets for the very high armor base, and again, that armor mitigation also applies the damage over time. For the Exalted mod, we're going for cast speed. The other prefix, we're going for mana, and then the double armor suffixes. Now, I know I talked about this earlier. The most important stats on these gloves is that sealed off drain effect, where you get 5% of your current health lost per second, but you gain 5% of missing health gained as ward. This is absolutely necessary in order to proc the passive node Divine Barrier to convert your healing hands over to ward. You will generate 0 ward if you don't have that mod on there. So please click on the timestamp if you need to know how to craft those gloves, so I can teach you how to add them on there. It's deterministic. You can do it first try. It's super, super easy to add this mod on your gloves. None of the other stats matter on these gloves unless you have that modifier on there. So please do not skip this step. All right, next up, we're going to go over our idols. So I'm using 3 adorned idols that give increased healing effectiveness and chance to apply armor shred on fire hit. So we are hitting with fire constantly between healing hands and smite. So we're going to be shredding armor really, really fast, which is why I wanted to go for the increased effect of armor shred on the champion regalia. And then on top of that, we're getting the healing effectiveness. We're getting almost 300% healing effectiveness just with these 3 idols. The goal for healing effectiveness is to be over 1,000%. So if you can get over 1,000%, you're going to very easily get over 30k ward. For the small little 1x1 idols, we're going for increased healing effectiveness and poison res. So that's what I got in there. You can also get like void res or physical res, just depending on what you're currently missing. And then the last thing to go over is our blessings. So from the Black Sun blessing, you're going to go for crit multi. We don't need spell leech on this build as we're a ward build, so go for the crit multi blessing. From the Ending the Storm timeline, we want the flat mana. Obviously, we went over that quite a bit. From the Reign of Dragons timeline, we're looking for the 20% to all resistance. I'm not grabbing the Critical Strike Avoidance because I can get all the hybrid armor rolls on my gear to make me not take any extra damage from crits. So that makes our gearing a lot easier, allowing us to just get the all res blessing and then need almost no resistance on our gear outside of our rings. For the Age of Winter timeline, we're going for the increased percentile armor. And for the Spirits of Fire, we're going for a chance to apply shred fire resistance on hit. This is different than armor shred. So armor applies to all damage types, but it applies less effective on non-physical hits. So we still want armor shred and we want fire shred. So having both of those on there is going to drastically increase your single target DPS. Alrighty guys, that's going to wrap up the gearing section as well as the idols and blessings. Like I said earlier, I'm going to have timestamps on where to farm each of the unique items and which order to farm them in. So go ahead and click on the timestamp if you need to access that. Alright, before I go too deep into where to target farm everything and what order to do it, I did want to give you guys some alternatives. If you haven't found the unique items, kind of what to look for. Like I said, none of the unique items are required. So these are the replacements that I would add into the build. So until you get Devotion, I would just use a Gold Amulet base. That way you don't have to change your res around since the Devotion also gives you Fire and Lightning res from the implicit. And then it's basically just the same stats that I'm slamming on top of those uniques. So we're looking for healing effectiveness, crit multi, chance to apply frailty, and the stun avoidance mod for replacement. If you guys don't have the Soulfire yet, we're going to be looking for a Solar Commandment. This is actually a super solid relic. I would probably use this over the Soulfire until you get one with like a couple LP on it, because the implicit is giving you increased fire damage and increased healing effectiveness. And then on top of that, you can still add healing effectiveness as one of the modifiers. And this will make it a lot easier to hit your plus levels of Smite if you use one of these guys in the meantime. So that's what I'd recommend there. As far as the boots, I'd probably just do some Citadel boots, make it nice and easy to get your reduced bonus critical strike damage taken early on. Look for an Exalted movement speed. You could even look at getting the seconds of haste after you use a traversal skill just to make you move around a little faster. For the belt, I would probably get the Praetorian belt for the increased armor. Looking for that fire damage. You do want to get a cleanse on potion use since you're not going to have it by default on the regular belts. And then looking for the armor hybrid and the stun avoidance. For the helmet, I would probably just use the Great Helm base for that reduced bonus critical strike and the very heavy armor roll it gets. Looking for the level of healing hands, mana, and double armor. Now, honestly, if you're not going to use a Prismatic Gaze, losing that crit chance is going to hurt really bad in the damage department. What I would recommend doing, if you don't have a Prismatic Gaze yet, is farming a Peak of the Mountain. It comes from the Lightless Arbor dungeon, and even at a tier 1, which I think is level like 35 monsters, super easy to farm, it gives you a 45% chance to drop this from the boss, and this will give you up to 290% increased critical strike chance. On top of that, it's really easy to get legendary potential on the Peak of the Mountain versus Prismatic Gaze. This is a super solid alternative item that I would highly recommend over any Exalted item. So just go farm one of these instead of trying to deal with an Exalted item. You can eventually get the Prismatic Gaze. Honestly, most of the time it gives you more crit than the Prismatic Gaze. It just doesn't come with the reduced elemental damage taken and the elemental res shred effect. So as far as the crit goes, though, this one would probably be king, and yeah, it's super easy to obtain. So that's what I would recommend for you guys. But that should give you some at least alternatives until you find those unique items. All right, guys, the next thing I want to go over is target farming in Last Epoch. How do you get the particular unique items that I use for this build? How to target farm your idols, your exalted gear. All of that can be target farmed in one way or another. Now, the first thing I want to kind of explain is the difference between boss drops and random drops. This is probably the thing that people get wrong the most when I'm streaming. People are constantly coming in saying they're having problems getting certain things to drop, and it's because they're trying to farm them in the wrong way. So for this build, the unique items I have on the left here are all from bosses. So you have the Immolator's Oblation, the Throne of Ambition, Yulia's Path. These are boss drops. The random drops I'm using in the build are the Devotion, the Prismatic Gaze, the Soulfire. So boss drops can only come from that particular boss that they drop from. There are a couple different runes and quests that you can do to help like target farm unique items. Those do not work on boss drops. So you have what's called a Rune of Ascendance. So that changes a normal, rare, magic, or exalted item into a random unique of that same type. So if you use on like a pair of boots, it would turn into a random unique pair of boots. You cannot use Rune of Ascendance to acquire any of these uniques here. They have to drop off the boss themselves. You also have, if you're part of the Circle of Fortune faction, something called Prophecies. Those are quests that you can accept that will give you certain rewards. For instance, you could say the prophecy could be, go kill, an exiled mage, and he will drop 10 unique helmets or something like that. So even if you have a prophecy that says go kill the Age of Winter boss that typically drops Yulia's Path, and he'll drop 10 unique boots, those 10 unique boots will never be a Yulia's Path. They're going to be 10 random drop unique boots, and then he has the same chance to just randomly also drop the Yulia's Path amongst his drop pool. But the prophecy will not affect that in any way. Do not spend your runes of Ascendance. Do not spend all your favor, excepting Prophecies, trying to get one of these items. It will not drop. It will only help you target farm the random drops. All right, now with that being said, how I recommend farming the uniques. I recommend setting out to farm one of the particular boss drop uniques and then setting up Prophecies to farm the other random drops while you're farming these guys. So the first one I would recommend farming is the Immolator's Oblation. So this drops off of a dungeon boss. It drops off of the Soulfire Bastion dungeon. Let me pull it up here real quick. Sorry, guys. I just want to make sure I get the tier right. So you have different tiers of dungeons. So that you can complete that will give you different drops. So for the belt drop, it has to be a tier 3 or higher Soulfire Bastion in order to have a chance to drop the belt. So at tier 3, it's going to give you a 12% chance, and at tier 4, it's going to give you an 18% chance. So I would recommend going and doing the Soulfire Bastion first to go farm for this belt once you get to the end game, if you're able to do that boss. If you're not, that's totally fine. You can go ahead and skip it and wait until you get some of the other uniques, until your build's more powerful to be able to farm it. However, this build kicks ass at farming bosses. It should be just fine. And then the second boss unique I would recommend doing is the Throne of Ambition. Now, the Throne of Ambition drops off of a timeline boss. So it drops off the Stolen Lance boss. So the higher level corruption that you're able to do, the higher chances that you'll have to drop that unique. This is not the rare unique from that boss. It's kind of like the middle unique. So it shouldn't take you, 30 tries like a Twisted Heart or something to get it. It might be like 5 to 10 tries, but it shouldn't be too bad to acquire this. And that will drastically improve your single target DPS. The last boss I would recommend farming is for the Yulia's Path. That is also a timeline boss, and it drops off of the Age of Winter. So it is the final boss from the Age of Winter, the moose guy that you kill, that has a chance to drop it. It's also not the rare drop from that boss, so you should get quite a few Yulia's Pass as you're farming. It may take you a couple tries, but it shouldn't really be like 20, 30 tries to get it, more like 5 tries or something to get a pair of boots. Now, while you're farming for these boss uniques, I would recommend setting up Prophecies to farm these guys. The first Prophecies I would set up would be for an amulet. So if you're farming currently the belt and you're doing a bunch of Soulfire Bastions, I would recommend setting up Prophecies for killing Soulfire Bastion at tier 3 or tier 4. So that way you have a chance to get the devotion at the same time as dropping the Immolator's Oblation. Or if you've already dropped the belt and you still haven't got the devotion yet, then you're going to set up Prophecies for doing the timeline that Throne of Ambition's in. So that's the Stolen Lance. So maybe look for Prophecies that are giving you Stolen Lance boss kills. Or vice versa. If you've already dropped the amulet before you got your belt, then maybe you set up unique helmet drops for the Soulfire dungeon, so that way you can try to get prismatic gazes while you're farming the dungeon. The big key thing here is you don't want to be getting Prophecies for an activity that you're not planning on already doing. So if I'm trying to find like my Soulfire or my Soulfire Relic, so I have a unique Relic node here, and that's for, so if you look at the condition, it says I need to be doing a Soulfire Bastion tier 4. If I've already farmed my belt and I'm not planning on doing the Soulfire Bastion anymore, do not accept a Prophecy for an activity that's going to take you out of your way of farming the other stuff that you're doing. The thing I would do is I would just keep re-rolling. Even if I have to re-roll 10, 15 times until I get something that's an activity I'm already doing, I'm going to do that. So this one right here, it says the event, Death of Herat. Condition, that's the Age of Winter timeline boss. That's where Yulia's boots drop. So if I'm ready to start farming Yulia and I'm already farming the Age of Winter timeline, that is the perfect Prophecy to get to also target farm the Soulfire. So hopefully that makes sense. So I would get stuff that's either in the timeline you're farming, the dungeon you're farming, or generic stuff like killing an Exiled Mage. Exiled Mages can spawn in every single timeline, or killing like a rare monster like a Diamond Matron. Diamond Matrons can spawn in every timeline. Sometimes it'll just say a generic kill a boss. It won't even specify which boss. You're always going to be going towards killing some kind of boss. So make sure you're grabbing Prophecies for activities you're already doing. The next thing I want to go over is the lenses. So you can put 3 lenses in the bottom left-hand corner for the different areas that you're farming for Prophecies. Now, I use the same 2 lenses for every single zone I'm farming in. I use these 2 purple guys, the Refracting Lens of Rime and the Refracting Lens of Wealth. This is an endgame strategy, because if you look in the bottom right-hand corner, it says it requires rank 7 of Circle of Fortune and rank 8 of Circle of Fortune. So if you are at that point, pick up these two lenses. What they do, the Refracting Lens of Rhyme, is 80% more cost of your prophecies, but your prophecies offer twice as many uses before expiring. So if you have a prophecy, let's open one up so I can show you an example. So this one right here, it says I need to kill the Emperor of Corpses in the Reign of Dragon timeline. And at the very top, it says fulfilled 0 out of 2 times. So if I pick up this prophecy, each time I kill the Emperor of Corpses, he's going to drop me 14 amulets up to 2 times. But if I have that Rhyme prophecy that doubles the amount of uses, I can now kill him 4 times, and he's going to give me 14 amulets. And then the other one here, the Refracting Lens of Wealth, is also going to increase the cost of the prophecy, but it's going to double the rewards on completion. So if we're looking at that amulet again, that gives me 14 amulets. Instead, when I kill the Emperor of Corpses, it's going to drop me 28 amulets. It stacks to ridiculous numbers. I set up enough prophecies that one time I was able to get 62 unique helmets off of 1 boss kill. So these are both extremely powerful lenses. I would highly recommend them if you are higher level. And then for the third lens, I just put in whatever I'm target farming. So if I'm trying to get a devotion, I'm going to put the Focusing Lens of Pentacles in here. That gives me an increased chance to find amulet prophecies. So that would be my 3 lenses I would use. Or if I'm farming for the Prismatic Gaze, I'd use the Helmet Lens. So I have a higher chance of seeing the Helmet quests. Or, the Relic one if I'm trying to find a Soulfire Bastion. So those are the 3 I set up. If you're too low of a level and you can't use these 2 guys, then I would probably use these 2. So I'd use the Obscuring Lens of Battle. That's going to reduce the chance that a prophecy is an arena event. Don't ever farm arena unless you're going for one of the specific uniques that drops out of the arena. The arena is terrible XP. It's terrible drop rates. The only point of doing it is to show off that your bugged build can push, higher than somebody else's bugged build. So it's a complete waste of time. I want to see less of those. So I'd use that one. The other one I would use is if I'm going for unique items, is I probably use this one that gives me 15% increased chance per unique to or per rank to find unique items. That's only requires rank 3 and 4. So I would just pair those with one of these until you can get to rank 7 or 8. So that's how I set up the lenses. That's how I set up the prophecies, kind of my mindset. Make sure it's an activity you're already planning on doing. And then that's the order I'm farming. Farm for the boss uniques, and then set up prophecies along the way for the random uniques you still don't have. Now, once you have all the uniques, you can start farming for all of the other gear. All of the idols and exalted gear can all be farmed using prophecies. So the thing I would probably recommend doing next is farming for idols. Idols give you a lot of healing effectiveness. It's going to give you a lot of extra ward. And it's also going to give you a lot of armor shred for a lot of your DPS increases. So I'd probably do those next. And then just depending on what your weakest piece of gear is for your exalted pieces, I would just set up prophecies for that particular slot. And that should help you farm that. Now, the other alternative, like I had mentioned before for the unique items, is you can use a Rune of Ascendance. So that's going to change the random, normal, magic, rare, or exalted item into a unique item of that same type. So, for example, if I go into my stash here and I pull out a random, let's say, amulet, and I put it in here, and I use a Rune of Ascendance on it, it turns it into a random, unique amulet. So you could do that to try to get Devotion, Prismatic Gaze, or Soulfire. It will not work on these boss uniques again. The other thing to keep in note with Runes of Ascendance is if you're in the Circle of Fortune, there's the rank 2 of Circle of Fortune. 45% chance for Runes of Ascendance to be preserved when used on an item that requires at least Circle of Fortune rank 1. That last line there is really important. So if you look at an item in the bottom right-hand corner, you see how it has a purple icon there that says rank 5? That is what it's talking about. In order to get that 45% chance not to use your Rune of Ascendance, it has to have that little purple icon on there. So if you look at like my chest piece, it doesn't have that purple icon. So if I was trying to upgrade that to get a unique chest piece, it would not give me that extra chance to not use my runes. So just keep that in mind if you guys are on the Circle of Fortune. But those are the different methods on how you target farm all of your gear. That's the order I would farm them in. So hopefully that helps you guys out on kind of what direction to go when farming all of your gear. Alrighty, guys, the last thing for the gear portion is I want to go over how to craft the gloves that I've been talking about throughout the build guide. So in order to make this build function, you have to have a pair of gloves that has the 7% of current health lost per second, 7% of missing health gained as ward. So I wanted to show you guys how to deterministically get that particular experimental mod on a pair of gloves. The rest of the stats on your gloves don't matter until you get that one particular mod. Then you can make a crazy like 5-stat pair of gloves, but first you need to get to that step there. So I'm going to show you guys how to do that. In the video description, I'm going to put a link to this website here. It is for lastepoch.tunklab. Tunk makes a bunch of different tools for Last Epoch that allows us to have a better understanding for the game and to show how to craft different things. So what this particular tool does is it gives us the weightings on on how to craft experimental mods. So how it works is you're going to need to first select the gloves tab here, make sure that's selected. And then what you're going to do is you're going to fill out your item properties. So basically I'm going to go through, I have a T6 cast speed on this pair of gloves. So I'm going to go ahead and hit T6 on there for that first prefix. My second prefix is a tier 2. So I'm going to put tier 2. My first suffix is a tier 3. So we're going to put tier 3. And then I don't have another suffix on there. Now, what that does is it adds up all of the numbers from the tiers. So it's adding 6 plus 2 plus 3. It's grabbing that total tier number. So total tiers is 11. And it's giving you what the experimental mod would be if I upgraded it at this current time. Now, in order to upgrade a mod to an experimental affix, you need a special glyph called the Glyph of Insight. Glyph of Insights will change a prefix into an experimental mod. So if I use that Glyph of Insight right now onto my prefix, my tier 2 prefix, it would give me 6 to 7 ward gained on kill, not the mod we're looking for. Now, in order to get a Glyph of Insight, they do not drop off the ground. So if you don't have any, you're like, I have never seen this, it must be super rare, it's because you're doing it wrong. How you acquire the Glyph of Insights is you need to kill exiled mages. When you kill an exiled mage, he guarantees drops an item that already has an experimental affix on it. Once he drops that item, he also has a chance to drop a rune of research. What you'll want to start doing is picking up all of the experimental mods that he drops and using a rune of research on that item. What runes of research does is it seals that particular experimental mod on the item, so it doesn't take up one of the 4 slots that are typically used for affixes. When you seal an experimental mod, it has a chance to just drop a Glyph of Insight on the ground right in front of you. So that's how you will acquire those Glyph of Insights to be able to do this craft. All right, so let's get to the next step here. So this is not the right mod I want. So what I need to determine is how many extra tiers I need to add to this glove to give me the right thing. So the first step would probably be adding a suffix here. So if I add a tier 1 suffix, it changes it to a total tiers of 12. So adding all those numbers together. And now it would give me dodge rating. That's still not what I want. So what would happen if I don't want health regen per second on my gloves. So I'm probably going to hit that with a chaos glyph. So what happens if I upgrade that from a tier 3 to a tier 4 with a chaos glyph? So you see now it changed over to the mod I'm looking for. So I need to add, I need to get 2 upgrades basically. So I'm going to add a suffix and then I'm going to try to hit a chaos glyph. If you happen to hit a critical success where it randomly upgrades a tier, that's going to change how things work here. So if I get a critical success when I first add the suffix, I'm done. I don't need to upgrade this. I already have the appropriate 13 tiers on the item. So let's go ahead and do this step here. So for this particular build, I really want armor. So I'm going to go and add a Glyph of Hope. That gives me a chance to not use my forging potential. And I'm going to add an armor suffix on here. So I want the reduced bonus damage taken one. So I'm going to add this. Okay, I didn't hit a critical success. So what that means is this is what my current pair of gloves looks like. Tier 6, Tier 2, Tier 3, Tier 1. Now, I don't want this to accidentally hit a critical success, so I'm going to chaos that mod. So that's going to bring it up to a tier 4, which is going to give me the correct mod. That's only if I don't hit a critical success here. So I don't want a health regen mod, so I'm going to use a Glyph of Chaos that will change it to a random mod, but it's going to upgrade its tier. Okay, dodge rating, also not good. but it gives us the correct tier now. So now that I've got all the tiers added up correctly, that equals 13. So, we've got 6 plus 4 is 10, plus 2 plus 1 is 13. So now I'm going to change this over to a Glyph of Insight. You can only use a Glyph of Insight on a prefix, so keep that in mind. So that's why I didn't upgrade the crit chance, because this is going to turn into a different mod, and the tier of the mod doesn't determine the tier of the experimental mod. The tier of the experimental mod is determined based on all of these tiers combined. For this particular build, we actually want the lowest tier of the health drain as possible. So this will actually give us a tier 2 drain mod, as it says right here, which is, I think, the lowest tier it could be. I don't think you can get a tier 1. So I'm going to grab this with Insight, and I'm going to upgrade my critical strike chance now. Okay, so you see right here, it now says experimental ward per missing health. So I just hit the mod I'm looking for. So if this is just a crappy pair of gloves and that's where you want to end the craft for now, then awesome. You got the mod you're looking for. You can now generate ward on this build because you have that drain effect that we talked about in the Healing Hands tree. If you're trying to upgrade and make a really good pair of gloves, like this is the ideal base. It's got cast speed on it, which is pretty strong. That's like your ideal modifier. This could potentially be a really good pair of gloves. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go back to a Glyph of Hope, so I have a chance not to use my forging potential, and I'm going to hit it with a Rune of Research, like we talked about earlier. So that just sealed this modifier. It's still on the pair of gloves, but now I have an empty slot where I can add another stat. So if I click over here to prefixes, I can add whatever I want. So I want mana. So cast speed and mana are the 2 best stats. So I'm going to add that on there. So now I have a pair of 5 statted gloves that I just crafted. So now I can just keep crafting this however I want. So I'll finish out the craft as I'm doing it. I already have a really good pair of gloves that have all the ideal stats. I just want these stats to be higher. So I'm going to take a little bit of a gamble here. I need to pull off that T5 dodge rating. So I'm going to gamble it with the Rune of Removal, even though it's going to be a 90% chance to break. But that's just where I'm at with the gloves right now. Okay, so I got really lucky, and I pulled off the dodge rating. I still only have 11 forging potential, and I've got 2 tier 1s and an empty stat. So still not looking like it's going to be good, but we're going to try our best. So let's go ahead and add a suffix on here. Let's add that extra armor that I want. Okay, so now I have all 5 of the perfect stats I want. I just need them higher tier. So I'm going to start upgrading stuff. I typically don't upgrade past tier 3 just in case I get like a critical success, because the higher tier you're upgrading, the more likely it is to use forging potential. Okay, so that bricked it. I ran out of forging potential, but that's a pretty good pair of gloves, especially if you're just starting out. Exalted cast speed, mana, double armor, and the health drain effects that we're looking for. So that's how you deterministically craft the gloves using that tool from Tunk Lab. I will put that tool in the video description so you can use it to craft your own pair of gloves. And then that should set you up where the build will start generating ward. So hopefully that helps you guys out. Let me know if you have any questions though in the comments, or feel free to drop by the live stream. I'm happy to show you another example if you have any specific questions that you're looking for. All right, guys, next up, I want to show you how to use my Lootfilter, how to import it, and basically how to read the different rules so you know what to do with the different gear that's dropping. So first off, in the video description, there's going to be a section that says Paste Bin. If you click it, it's going to pull up a link to the Paste Bin. It looks like this. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to highlight all of the text context inside of the Paste Bin. Take it to the bottom here, and then you're going to copy it. Once you have that copied, you're going to head into game. You're going to click Shift F to pull open this window. Then you're going to click this little green plus sign. Do not click Create New Filter, but click Paste Clipboard Contents. Once you do that, it's going to import the entire filter. You can name it whatever you like. So, but it's Holy Fire Paladin, something like that. Give it a nice little fire icon. All right, boom. We got our Lootfilter imported. So this is what it's going to look like. To give you an idea of how it reads, is it goes from top up. So I have a rule at the very bottom that hides all items from appearing on the ground, and then everything that I add above that is going to show up on the ground. So the first couple of things to know is the recolors here, these first 3 items. So anything that shows up like this font right here with an emphasized underline and in bold white, it means it is a common affix that is tier 5 or higher. So what you'll want to do is use a Rune of Shattering for any items that drop like that. So you'll just go in, you'll click F, you'll put the item in there, you'll select a Rune of Shattering, and you'll shatter it. That's to try to get the tier 5 affix as shards to pop up. The next one is the red recolor. So if it looks just like this when it's on the ground with whatever name the item is, that means it has a rare affix on the item, such as level to smite or level to healing hands. So in those cases, you don't want to use a Rune of Shatter because Runes of Shatter have an RNG element to it. It may give you the affixes you want, it may not. So for those particular items, what you want to do is open up the crafting window, select a Rune of Removal, and you're going to hit the Rune of Removal until it removes the mod that gives you the level of skill, because that will guarantee that it gives you the rare shard affixes from that item. The next rule here, the blue recolor. So this is for all of the experimental mods that drop off of the exiled mages when you kill them. So if you see something that's blue with an underline, what you'll want to do is go to your crafting window, select a Rune of Discovery, and you'll want to hit the item with the Rune of Discovery. What that will do is seal off the experimental modifier from the item, and then it gives you a chance to drop a Glyph of Insight at your feet. This is the only way you can get a Glyph of Insight, so try to be picking those items up. They're pretty much only going to show up when you killed exiled mages. All right, for the rest of the filter, how I build my filters, if you've never played one of my builds before, is I make my filters evolve with your character. So like I was mentioning earlier in the guide, I am going to have a leveling planner in the video description for you where I play Hammer Paladin until I get to level 25, in which case you can switch over to the spell version of the build. So this first section of the filter is going to be for the Hammer Paladin. It is going to naturally drop off all of these rules once you hit level 25. So once you hit level 25, none of these items are going to show up on the loot filter anymore. So they're all level 1 through 25. After that happens, it is going to start dropping spell gear for you. So I have the wand section here. So these are going to start naturally upgrading the base of wands to make sure you're getting a high flat spell damage wand as you level up. So from level 20 to 30, it's going to show birch wands for you. From level 31 to 46, it's going to show ivory wands for you, and so on and so on. That way you're making sure you're not equipping a lower level wand that's going to nerf your damage drastically. So I have the same thing happening with every single slot of gear up until where it shows endgame wands. So none of these wands will show up anymore. Once you get past 59, it's only going to show you crystal wands, which is the ideal wand for this build. And the same thing's going to happen with the rest of the gear. So we have the catalyst rules, we have helmet rules. The one thing I did want to mention is some endgame rules. So this is show endgame helmets. It has in parentheses here, delete after getting Prismatic Gaze or Peak of the Mountain. So once you get the unique item that is going to replace those rare items or exalted items, you don't need to be seeing all these random rare helmets anymore. So if you just uncheck this box, or if you want to go over here and click the X mark to just delete the rule altogether, that way it's not showing you any more rare helmets on the ground. The filter is still going to show you exalted helmets that you could use to slam into your uniques that have legendary potential, but that will pull off all of the rare items from the ground. So just make sure you do that if it does tell you to do it. So we got some body armors, and then you see here at the end game belt, because we're using a unique belt, after getting the Immolator's Oblation, this guy right here, uncheck this or delete it. So that way you're not seeing a bunch of rare belts anymore. Same thing with the boots, Yulia's Path. Once you get that, uncheck or delete and get rid of that. Same thing with the devotion. And then once you get to the point where your character is fully exalted and unique gear, you have all the stuff that drops. Up here, I give a little reminder, delete/uncheck all the rules below the idle rules except the recolors and hide rule once you get all exalted gear for strict filter. So you don't need to download a separate strict filter. All you'll do is here's the idle rule. So that's the last one. Everything underneath this is a rare, and you're just going to go through and uncheck all of these. So you're going to uncheck them all the way down. So it says right here to the recolor and hide rule. So these are the recolors and hides. So you're going to uncheck them all the way down to this one right here. And then if you do that, now you have a super strict filter for the end games. So you're not getting flooded with gear. So hopefully that makes sense. If you guys have any questions though, just let me know in the comments. I'm happy to break things down a little bit better for you if you do have any questions about how the filter works. All right, next up, guys, I want to show you the build rotation. Just kind of showing you how to apply your damage, how to keep your buffs up, and hopefully help answer any other questions if it didn't make sense in the original intro of the video where I was showcasing the build. So how this character works, it only looks like I have really low health and ward because of the drain effect on my gloves. As soon as I start attacking, it's going to start skyrocketing my health up, and then I'm going to get tons of word, right? So don't get scared about that. If it's looking like that before you enter an echo or before you go into a new zone, that's why that's happening. So the general start of the build is the first thing you want to do is drain your mana to activate the bonuses from your devotion that give you increased spell damage, increased cast speed for mana. So as soon as I enter the mana, I'm just holding down my Sigils of Hope. So I can still move while I'm holding those down. I can still cast. It doesn't interrupt me at all. You can see my mana starting to drain here. So typically the first like 10, 15 seconds of the echo, you're just going to hold that guy down. And then once you get below 50 mana, I'm going to let go. And then just every time it gets up over 50, I'm just going to tap it once. So it's only every like few seconds typically, unless you're on like a boss fight. But you want to try to keep that mana pool as low as possible without going negative. If you go negative, it is not going to let your healing hands proc. So see how I'm negative like 30 right now? I didn't get any ward when I cast that because I didn't have enough mana to cast Healing Hands. So you need to make sure you don't go negative. So that's why never cast Sigils if you're below 50 mana, but just tap it every now and then whenever it gets above 50. You don't have to get it exactly. You're just gonna not cast quite as fast and not hit quite as hard if you forget. But that's the general rotation there. Now, other than that, you're mainly spamming Smite. Your Healing Hands is your movement key. For a burst of damage, if you activate your Holy Aura, it will give you extra cast speed, extra fire pen, extra healing effectiveness. So that's kind of a DPS buff. And then Volatile Reversal, you do typically on bosses or tanky monsters. Just keep in mind, whenever you cast Volatile Reversal, it's going to take you back in time 2 seconds. So if you're on a boss, though, and you're standing still and you cast it, it's not going to take you anywhere, but it's going to give you a massive damage multiplier to anything it hits with this purple aura, and it's going to give you 30% cast speed. So typically what it'll look like when I'm on a boss doing your damage rotation is I'm just going to be checking my mana pool, and I'm just going to sit there and spam. I am going to face tank all of the boss mechanics. I'm not going to move at all. And then I'm just going to be casting Holy Aura and Volatile Reversal on cooldown. And that's basically it, guys. Gets you over 30k ward. Pretty easy build. You're mainly just trying to keep check of your mana and casting smites. And the other 2 buttons are really only for bossing. So hopefully that makes sense for you guys. Gives you a good idea of how to play the build. It should be very simple, much simpler than the Mad Alchemist build. So yeah, that's how you play the build. Next thing I wanted to go over is monolith and echo modifiers. So every time you guys do an echo and you go to select it, so I hover over this, it's going to have an enemy modifier. So this one, for instance, is enemies have an 18% chance to slow on hit. There's a couple modifiers that you generally want to try to avoid when you get to higher corruptions. Anything below 700 corruption, I don't even look at it. It doesn't matter. It's just going to face roll it. But when you start getting up to those insane damage modifications where monsters are doing 1000% increased damage to you, you're going to want to be a little bit pickier on what you can do based on your build. So I wanted to go over what I typically avoid trying to do on this build. So the ones I'm typically trying to avoid are stuff that say like this one right here. Enemies have increased critical strike avoidance and have extra health. So we're a crit build. This is basically just like we're doing 35% less crits, which is not good for us. It's going to dampen your damage by a lot. The other modifiers you want to try to avoid is stuff that says enemies have a chance to dodge, where we are a ward build based on proccing our spells. So if you're constantly trying to hit an enemy and your hit is not hitting him, then you're not going to be casting your healing hands and you're not going to be getting ward. So try to avoid enemies have dodge chance. The other modifiers are typically things I only avoid right before I do a boss. So right before I get my stability bar over here, or right before I kill a Shade of Orbis, I try to avoid stuff like Endurance. So Endurance is going to make them take substantially less damage when they get low health, and is going to make a big halt and increase the time it takes to kill bosses. The other one I try to avoid is enemies in rage at half health. That is going to make the boss hit way harder and faster. You don't want to mess around with that at high corruptions. So I try to avoid those two modifiers when dealing with bosses. The other one that, it's kind of hit or miss just depending on where you're at, is high health enemies take less damage. So right here, high health enemies take 25% less damage. So that's just going to hamper the kill times when you're at the super high corruptions. Not a huge deal, but just something I generally avoid out of quality of life right before I'm about to do a boss kill. So hopefully that helps you guys and sets you up for success as you're pushing your corruption. All right, so the very last part of the video, as far as the informational content goes, guys, is I wanted to go over the common facts or questions that I am getting asked when I was playing this build. If you guys are skimming through the video, you might have missed some of these parts. And so these are the 3 most common questions that I got while playing this build that will hopefully help you out. So the first one I've went over a few times in the video at the very beginning as well. Why am I not getting any ward? I see that you are gaining like 30,000 ward. Why is my character not getting it? Is because of the node right here, Divine Barrier. You have to have a health drain effect on your gear in order to proc Healing Hands as a ward healing ability instead of a health healing ability. So click on the timestamp that shows how to craft the gloves. It will go over it more in detail. You need that drain modifier if you are going to be gaining ward on this build. Sorry, guys. Turn those off. The second most common question I get is why don't I have any mana? If you see me playing the build, my mana is going to be almost 0. So people immediately think, oh, this build has mana issues. It's going to need a lot of mana investment. No, that is not the case. I am purposely draining my own mana with Sigils of Hope until I am like sub 50 mana, because I am using an amulet that gives me 1 flat spell damage per 5 missing mana and 1% increased cast speed with Smite per 2% missing mana. So you can see my mana wants to get up there, but I'm purposely keeping it down. My actual damage dealing ability does 0 or costs 0 mana. So I can spam this all day long, no matter how low of a mana pool I have. I am just purposely manipulating my mana pool to keep it low, and that way I can maximize my damage output. And then the third question I was getting there is, why don't you have Healing Hands on your bar? So Healing Hands is being auto-procced with our Smite. So I don't ever actually need to cast Healing Hands. However, I am using Healing Hands as a movement ability, but it has a longer cooldown, and it doesn't go as far as some of other movement abilities. Now, the main purpose that you would use it as a movement ability is we take a node in this tree that makes us immune to damage while I'm casting Healing Hands, while I'm doing that movement ability. So it's really strong for bossing. For if there's going to be like a one-shot ability, I can just charge through it and I take 0 damage. However, when I'm going through echoes, I kind of prefer to use Lunge. So Lunge only has a 3.1 second cooldown, and I can go all the way across the screen as long as I have a mob to target. I don't use it on bosses because it works. So you can see me clicking it here. Nothing's happening. I don't use it on bosses because I have to target an enemy in order for it to proc the movement. And sometimes you want to use your movement skill to get away from the enemy in bosses and not go directly towards them. So if you see me playing the build, or if you look at any VODs and I don't have Healing Hands on my bar, that is why. It's being auto-procced already from Smite, and I am just trying to speed through Monoliths. However, I think it is definitely the go-to movement spell if you are doing bossing. Alrighty, guys, that is going to wrap up the build video. I hope this was informative for you guys, and it maybe taught you a couple new things that maybe you haven't known about before in last Epoch. If you guys still have any questions about the build, feel free to leave a comment down in the video below, or come check me out on my live streams. You can either check me out on YouTube Live or on Twitch at twitch.tv/pinchingloaf, and I'm happy to answer all your questions live. I go live every single day, except for Sundays from 10:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. Mountain Time, so feel free to catch me there. If you guys haven't already, if you appreciated the video or liked the video, I would it would greatly help me out if you guys could leave a like on the video and maybe think about subscribing to the YouTube. It doesn't cost you guys anything, but helps show YouTube that more people want to see my content and will help that algorithm push me out. So I appreciate all of you guys. It's been a fantastic time streaming since launch. The support has been unreal, especially on the last video for the Mad Lightning Runemaster. I hope you guys like this build as much as that one. I had a lot of fun making it. And that's all I've got. I need to get some sleep. I need to still edit some stuff. So I'm going to be out of here, but I will catch you guys on the live streams. I'll see you guys later.